So one major unlock this year is the emergence of reinforcement learning and of reasoning in AI. Effectively, these techniques solve for the reliability issue and hallucinations, which is the biggest drawback of AI. So if you think about it as a consumer, just in terms of trust, if your model is hallucinating, it's a lot tougher to trust that model. And that's even amplified for business users where they can't, as a business, give wrong answers and have hallucinations in their business workflow. And so, really, what we've seen this year is that reasoning and that RL has gotten a lot better. And the anecdote I like to point to explain what reasoning and RL really looks like is imagine two scenarios. One is you have a math test, and all you've done is you've skimmed the math textbook. That's going to be a hard test for you to do. The other example, which is closer to RL and to reasoning models, is imagine you've skimmed the math textbook and then you've done all of the practice questions a couple times at the end of every chapter, and then you take the test. Your answers are probably going to be a lot better for that test and more reliable, and you'll feel better about the output. And whoever is grading that test is probably going to feel better about the output as well. That's the unlock and that's the opportunity that we have with RL and reasoning in models. And it really gets at that heart of hallucination reliability that's held models back in terms of adoption. And you've probably even seen this as a consumer. The other thing I'd point to, just in terms of optimism around use cases, is that actually the most revenue generative use case today of AI is ranking algorithms. So things like your Google search and your Facebook feed, those are all using AI. Now, it's not next token prediction AI, but it is generative AI. And so that is a really revenue generative use case today. And so there is real spend on the back of AI. The other thing that I think is important is to recognize if we're in a bubble or not. I think the catalyst to a bubble would be infrastructure overinvestment and a lack of monetizable use cases. Really, as the model improves and gets better and more reliable, there isn't any new revenue generative use cases. That's how you get a bubble. That's what's going to be a problem, especially given, unlike fiber in the ground in the telco cycle, GPUs have a 5-year lifespan. Fiber is good for decades. And after 5 years, it needs to be refreshed. So if we don't have that revenue generative use case emerge within 5 years, you've got to effectively redo much of the investment. So I think that's how you could see a bubble: is a lot of investment and revenue generative use cases actually continue to take longer than we expect. The other kind of dark horse candidate that I think is interesting to talk about is algorithmic improvement. So today, AI is very inefficient. If you think about it, the human brain, and let's use the use case of driving a car, the human brain is consumes about 20 watts. And I looked it up in Ontario for driver's ed. You need 10 hours behind the wheel to get your license. If you just compare that with Waymo, Waymo has tens of billions of simulated road hours to get to where it is today, and it's still not broadly deployed, and it uses many, many kilowatts per car to get there. Or even if you just compare it, a gigawatt data center is like 50 million brains. And so if we do have a real algorithmic improvement and unlock, it actually could drive demand for um, gigawatt data centers and lots of flops lower because the algorithms just get better. So that's kind of, how I think about AI implementation and use cases and the potential for a bubble.